The EU and China are to continue technical talks on alternatives to tariffs on electric vehicles. Russia's central bank hikes its key interest rate to the highest level since February 2003. And Lebanon has been added to the FATF's grey list for special financial crime scrutiny. Hello there and welcome to the Economic Bulletin, where we present comprehensive coverage and expert insights on key updates regarding pivotal economic trends and financial shifts. We start off with the global economy, as the International Monetary Fund Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, warned that the world is in danger of becoming mired in a low-growth, high-debt path that will leave governments with fewer resources to improve opportunities for their people, as well as tackle climate change and other challenges. As a result, populations are becoming increasingly dissatisfied, Georgieva said during a press conference at the IMF and World Bank annual meetings in Washington. The backdrop of the upcoming presidential election under President Biden could pave the way for a potential return of Donald Trump, bringing protectionist policies and significant new debt.
Will have a lasting impact in
The global economy faces a slowdown influenced by tight monetary policies, reduced global trade, a cooling Chinese economy, and uncertainty surrounding the U.S. election. Heightened conflict in the Middle East may further exacerbate instability, complicating efforts to control inflation and hindering growth. According to the Economics Observatory, Middle East tensions may raise geopolitical risks which could deter investment and potentially impact global energy markets through production cuts or disruption, leading to increased prices. Additionally, shipping disruptions pose a significant threat to stability. Recent attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea highlight the vulnerabilities in supply chains, given that 80% of global trade depends on maritime routes. Such blockages or rising shipping costs could strain supply chains, further exacerbating inflationary pressures. The International Monetary Fund (IMF) projects global GDP growth to decrease from 3.2% in 2023 to 3.1% by 2029. The IMF also reported that global debt is expected to surpass $100 trillion this year, driven by spending increases with limited tax hikes. On inflation, the IMF sees progress, with global rates likely declining to 4.3% by 2025, supporting longer-term economic stability.
Joining us today to discuss the latest global economic developments is Professor of Economics and Crisis Conflict Management at Cardiff Metropolitan University, Dr. Abdul Latif Darwish. Welcome to the Qnews Economic Bulletin. Thanks for joining us here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. And can we start with this question? How significant are the tight monetary policies and declining trade volumes contributing to the current global slowdown?
I believe that all these uncertainty came because of the bad management of the resources, the highest expenses on the defense industry. I mean, countries are purchasing a lot of arms, the tension in the Middle East, the war in the Ukraine led to this high let me say, the cost of production. So the economy is doing bad because we have also high inflation, and I don't agree with the IMF that the inflation will be managed, because I believe the purchasing power with major currencies like the euro and the dollar is becoming less. So I believe we are going to face a big problem unless we find a solution for the Ukraine and the Middle East problems, because as I see, it is going to be worse and worse since we are spending a lot of money on arms, since we don't use technology in, let me say, the financial institution. We don't upgrade the financial institutions. And all this will lead to, I believe, to worse situation in the economy.
And you mentioned Ukraine and the problems in the Middle East, but how is China's economic slowdown affecting global markets, particularly perhaps in developing countries or commodity-dependent economies?
Yeah, China slowdown, I believe it is because also of the tension, In case that, for example, Iran will be entering the war, this will harm China more, because China depends on the fuel or the oil from Iran and the Gulf countries. So this will be a big problem for China. China now, because in general, when you have a kind of uncertainty in the world market, people consume less. And most of the third world countries, they depend on China, cheap products. They consume less because there is a kind of anxiety. There is a kind of fear of the war. The products, the commodities and the products becoming more expensive. So the people, they simply consume less. And this will harm already the Chinese economy, because people are importing less from China.
Okay. And what strategies should economies consider to navigate these turbulent conditions and to foster growth? I mean, can they do something about it without us, the world, solving the problems that you've talked about?
I believe that each country must create a kind of crisis management team from all sectors in the country: security, economy, and other social institutions. And all countries must try to make a kind of a regional collaboration with their neighbors in order to overcome all these problems. Like, for example, no double taxation, encouraging the startup, encouraging the agriculture, having a better system for storaging. This will help the countries in case that we have the tension or the situation, the political situation are becoming worse, so they will not be harmed from the supply chain. That will be also a big problem in case of the tension becoming higher. So each country must have a kind of strategic plan on a regional and a national base.
Okay, and with global debt expected to exceed $100 trillion, how might this level of indebtedness affect fiscal policies in various countries and also economic growth in the coming years?
I just want to give you one example. Some African countries, they have already lost their national currency. They just use the Chinese yuan or the dollars or the French franc. So we have a big problem, especially in third world countries and even in the developed countries. When you talk about some European countries, members of the European Union, their debt is increasing more and more, and it is more than the national income, like, for example, 150 of the GDP. So this is a big problem. The United States have about 35 trillion. So I believe many countries will not be able to pay the debt. I believe that we have to find a solution for that, because it's the interest of the interest. It's not real loans for these countries. And simply, since these countries trying to serve these loans, their economy will become worse and worse.
Well, thank you very much for your input into our economic bulletin. Thank you, Professor of Economics and Crisis Conflict Management at Cardiff Metropolitan University, Dr. Abdul Latif Darwish. Thank you very much for joining us on our program. Moving to Europe, and the European Commission has said that the European Union and China are set to hold further technical negotiations on alternatives to tariffs for Chinese electric vehicles. The EU plans to impose tariffs of up to 35.3% next week, following its anti-subsidy investigation, but is open to continued talks afterwards. Options being explored include minimum price commitments from Chinese producers or investments in Europe. This was discussed in a video call between the EU trade chief, Valdis Dombrovskis, and the Chinese Minister of Commerce, Wang Wentao. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, speaking at the 18th Asia-Pacific Conference in New Delhi, has emphasized the need for rapid progress in free trade agreement talks between India and the European Union. He noted that if both sides collaborate effectively, a deal could be reached in months rather than years. India and the EU agreed in 2022 to revive negotiations, initially aiming to finalize the agreement by the end of 2023. But significant progress has been stalled, partly due to India's concerns over irrational EU standards.
We want a free trade agreement between the EU and India. My government is pushing for swift.
Data from the National Statistics Institute showed Spain's unemployment rate fell to 11.21% in the third quarter of 2024, from 11.27% 3 months earlier. The services sector accounted for the vast bulk of the 138,300 jobs created during the period. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez hailed this data, stating that they demonstrated the strength of the labour market and brought the goal of full employment closer. Also, the National Statistics Institute has said that Spanish industrial prices decreased by 5.2% in the 12 months ending in September, a significant drop from a revised decline of 1.4% for the year ending in August. The August decline was adjusted down from an initial estimate of 1.3%. Month over month, industrial prices fell 2.3% in September compared to August. UK Finance Minister Rachel Reeves has announced that she will adjust the definition of public debt in her upcoming budget on October 30th. This change is expected to allow for tens of billions of pounds in additional borrowing, aimed at reversing cuts to public investment implemented by the previous Conservative government. Reeves emphasised the importance of prioritising long-term investment while ensuring that debt decreases during the current Parliament. In Russia, the central bank hiked its key interest rate by 200 basis points to 21%, the highest level since February 2003 even. The central bank's recent report indicated that seasonally adjusted inflation rose to 9.8% in September, up from 7.5% in August. The regulator noted that looking ahead, the risks associated with inflation are primarily leaning toward inflationary influences. Additionally, inflation expectations have reached their highest level of the year. Moving to the United States now, and the number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits fell last week, while the total receiving benefits rose to its highest level in almost 3 years. The Labour Department reported that jobless claims dropped by 15,000 to 227,000, below analysts' expectations for 241,000 for the week ending on October 19th. Continuing claims increased by 28,000 to 1.9 million for the week ending on October 12th, the highest since November 2021.
New jobs last month. The fact that most of the jobs that have been added, so even though these recent employment numbers are
The United States has finalized a $20 billion portion of its $50 billion loan to Ukraine, which is backed by frozen Russian assets, and announced plans to start making funds available for economic and military aid by the end of the year. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and the Ukrainian Finance Minister Sergei Marchenko signed an agreement for a U.S. loan commitment of $20 billion. This will be placed alongside a separate $20 billion European Union commitment and $10 billion to be split by G7 allies Britain, Japan and Canada. The loan will be repaid using the more than $300 billion in Russian sovereign assets that have been frozen since February 2022.
We had imposed on this country, which has been going through.
Also, the U.S. Commerce Department's Census Bureau said that new orders for key United States manufactured capital goods rose more than expected in September. Non-defense capital goods orders, excluding aircraft, jumped 0.5% last month. Core capital goods shipments fell 0.3% following a previous dip. Higher borrowing costs have constrained business investment, though looser financial conditions earlier in the year boosted equipment spending. Current estimates for Q3 growth reach up to 3.4%, with the advanced GDP estimate due next week.
One of the reasons why
Statistics Canada has announced that retail sales increased by 0.4% in August, reaching $66.6 billion. When excluding motor vehicle sales, retail sales actually decreased by 0.7% in August, falling short of the expected 0.4% rise. Additionally, the agency's preliminary estimate for September suggests another 0.4% increase in retail sales. Core inflation in Japan's capital was 1.8% in October for the first time in 5 months. The core consumer price index, excluding fresh food, rose by 1.8% year-on-year, down from 2% increase in September, but surpassing the median market forecast of 1.7%. Also, services inflation also slowed this month, raising concerns about the Bank of Japan's expectations that rising wages would lead to sustained price increases around 2% target. Argentina's Economy Minister, Luis Capito, has announced that the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank are providing Argentina with $8.8 billion in financing. The World Bank will provide $2 billion for social spending, including education and energy costs for the poor, and $3 billion for private sector projects in areas like mining and renewable energy. The Inter-American Development Bank will contribute over $2.4 billion for additional social spending focused on education and energy services for low-income populations. In the MENA region, growth is projected at 2.1% in 2024, down 0.6% from the April forecast, primarily due to ongoing conflicts and OPEC production cuts. This statement came during a press briefing on the Middle East and Central Asia Department Regional Economic Outlook by Jihad Azur, Director of Middle East and Central Asia Department at the International Monetary Fund. Azur added that if these factors ease, growth could reach 4% in 2025. He also stated that MENA oil exporters may see growth rise from 2.3% this year to 4% by 2025, while oil importers could recover from 1.5% in 2024 to 3.9% in 2025.
The office that's going to be the one I mentioned is for the GCC. Sudan is definitely a crisis.
Data released by the General Authority for Statistics showed that Saudi Arabia's non-oil exports jumped 7.5% to $7.3 billion year-on-year in August 2024. The data also showed that Saudi Arabia's non-oil outbound shipments also grew by 8.13% compared to July. Saudi Arabia's overall merchandise exports declined by 9.8% in August compared to the same month last year, largely due to 15.5% drop in oil exports. Reuters has announced that Lebanon has been placed on a grey list of countries under special scrutiny by financial crime watchdog, the FATF. According to Reuters, the war has led the FATF to give Lebanon until 2026 instead of 2025 to address the issues that led to its grey listing, including concerns over terrorism financing and a lack of judicial independence. The grey listing is likely to further deter investment into Lebanon and could affect the relationship between some Lebanese banks and the global financial system. Wasim Mansouri, the acting governor of the Central Bank of Lebanon, stated that being added to the FATF grey list would further harm a country already facing a financial collapse since 2019. Oil prices edged up and are poised for a weekly gain of almost 3% amid tensions in the Middle East. Brent crude futures climbed 1.02% to $75.14 a barrel. US West Texas Intermediate crude was up by 1.1% to $70.96 a barrel. Gold prices dipped amid rising geopolitical tensions and US elections approaching. Spot gold fell by 0.1% to $2,734.25 per ounce. US gold futures were steady at $2,748.90. Now, global shares had a mixed performance as investors await the outcome of the US elections next week. In the United States, the S&P 500 rose 0.9% and the Dow Jones Industrial Average both went up by 0.5%, and the Nasdaq traded 1.4% higher. In Europe, Germany's DAX was flat, France's CAC 40 lost 0.3%, and Britain's FTSE 100 edged 0.1% lower. In Asia, Tokyo's Nikkei 225 index lost 0.6%, Hong Kong's Hang Seng added 0.6%, Shanghai Composite gained 0.4%, and South Korea's Kospi edged up by 0.1%. And that's all for our economic bulletin right now, but here's a roundup of today's key headlines. The EU and China will continue technical talks on alternatives to tariffs on electric vehicles. Russia's central bank hikes its key interest rate to the highest level since February 2003. And Lebanon has been added to the FATF's grey list for special financial crime scrutiny. That's all for today's Economic Bulletin here on Q News. Stay connected for more news and updates. You can follow us on our social media at qnews.egi. QNews EGY. Thanks for watching.